Okay, students. So, welcome, students. Welcome to lecture number 3, module 2 of under subject indirect taxation. So, in our earlier lectures, we had covered module number 1, where we covered that module under lecture 1 and lecture 2. Today, we will be seeing module number 2, which is levy and collection of tax. So under this module, what all is being covered is what is the scope of supply, what is composite and mixed supply, levy and collection, composition levy, exemptions, persons liable to pay GST, exemptions from tax, and you have problems on value of taxable supply. So module number 1 was complete theory module. Module number 2 is a combination of theory as well as problems. So moving ahead. Under this module, today we will be covering what is the scope of supply and composite and mixed supply. So completely we will be seeing supply in respect of GST today. So students, first thing you'll need to understand that section 7 speaks about completely supply under GST. As we all know that GST is levied on the supply of goods and services. So we know what is the meaning of goods, which we have already seen in an earlier lecture, that goods is nothing but every kind of movable property, which includes actionable claims, okay, but excludes money and securities. And we know what is services. Services is anything other than goods. Okay, so we know that GST is a levy on supply of goods and services. So it is very important for us to know what is the meaning of supply under GST. Once we know that a particular transaction amounts to supply, and that supply is leading to either supply of goods or service, then we know that GST is applicable on that particular transaction. So first we'll understand what is the scope of supply. So just remember students, section 7 of CGST Act speaks about supplies under GST. So when do we know that a particular transaction is a supply under GST? So there are certain conditions to qualify as a supply under GST. So there are 5 conditions, and if all the 5 conditions are fulfilled, then we know that it is a supply under GST. So let us see the first condition. There should be a supply of goods and services. So the first foremost condition is that there should be a supply, but there should be a supply of goods and services. Now, what do you mean by this? We mean by this that suppose if there is a supply of money and securities, will it be charged to GST? No, because money and securities both do not fall under the definition of goods as well as services. Therefore, there should be a supply of goods and services. So first, you need to ascertain whether that particular product or service is falling under the definition of goods and service. And if yes, then it will be liable to tax under GST. So the first foremost condition is there should be a supply of goods and or services. Next, it should be for a consideration. Now, that supply, whether that particular supplier is supplying goods and services, that should be supplied for a consideration. Now, what do you mean by consideration? Consideration simply means a payment, okay, that is made either by the recipient who is purchasing those goods or who is availing those services, or by any third person. So either it can be a payment in a monetary form or in any other form. So just remember students, the second condition is that it should be for a consideration. Third, it should be made in course or furtherance of business. Now, what do you mean by this? That GST is essentially only on the commercial transactions. So if any supplies is made by any individual in his personal capacity, then it will not be liable to GST. Because if it is in a personal capacity, it is not a business, correct? So GST will not be applicable if any person or any individual is supplying the goods which is in his personal capacity and not in his capacity of business, therefore it will be not liable to GST. So remember, the supply should be made for goods and services, it should be made for a consideration, and it should be made in course of furtherance of a business. So just to give an example, in course of furtherance of a business, suppose I have my personal car, okay, which I'm using, and if I sell that car to a car dealer, okay, I am using that car for my own personal purpose. From I use that car for all my home purposes, and I sell that car to a car dealer, then will GST will be applicable? Answer is no, GST will not be applicable, since it is not made in course or furtherance of the business, because it is made in my personal capacity. Therefore GST will not be applicable, even though there is a supply of car, even if car is a goods. Still, even if I'm making the sale to the car dealer for a consideration, but since I'm making it in my personal capacity, GST will not be applicable, as I'm not making it in course or furtherance of the business. Next, it should be made by a taxable person. Now, what do you mean by taxable person, students? Taxable person means a person who is registered under GST. See, as I told you in my first lecture, that every person who is providing services and if his turnover exceeds 20 lakhs, he is supposed to take GST registration. Or if he is supplying goods and the turnover of that goods is exceeding 40 lakhs, he is supposed to take GST registration. Suppose if any individual turnover is below 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs, he can voluntarily, by his own wish, also can take GST registration. So whoever takes the GST registration, they become a taxable person. So if the supply is made by a taxable person, then GST will be applicable. And this taxable person you have to see from the angle of the provider, supplier, and not from the angle of the recipient. Suppose there is a grocery shop, for example, suppose there is a grocery shop owner who is registered under GST, and when he is supplying the goods, okay, he is supposed to charge GST in the invoice. Even if the recipient is unregistered, suppose you go and buy some item from that shop, you are unregistered, but since the supplier is registered, he will be liable for GST, and he will be liable to charge GST in the bill. So supply should be made by a taxable person. Don't look at the recipient. If the recipient is unregistered also, it is irrespective. You have to just look from the angle of the person who is supplying the goods or supplying the services. If he is taxable person, then that particular supply will be liable to GST. Next, it should be a taxable supply. Now students, I have told you all that there are n number of goods and n number of services that are falling under GST, correct? But there are certain goods which are outside the ambit of GST, like alcohol for human consumption, 5 petroleum products which I told you all. Similarly, government has given certain exemptions on certain goods and services that even if they are supplied, there will be no GST on it. Government has excluded those particular goods and have given exemption, like essential products like milk, unpackaged milk, unbranded products, unbranded rice, unbranded food items. It is not liable to GST because government has exempted those products. So if a person is selling exempted products or products which are not under GST, GST will not be applicable. GST will be applicable only if the supply is a taxable supply. So students, if all these 5 conditions are meeting, then only GST will be applicable. Otherwise, GST will not be applicable on that particular supply. So just to once more go through it, there are 5 conditions for a supply to be taxed to GST. First, there should be a supply of goods and services. If a particular item is not falling under the definition of goods and service, it will not be liable to tax under GST. It should be for a consideration. It should be made for a consideration. in course or furtherance of the business. Supply should be made by a taxable person and it should be a taxable supply. So if all these 5 conditions are meeting, then only it is considered as a supply under GST. Now you all must be wondering why point number 2 and point number 3 is in red. So students, these are the 5 conditions which if met, it will be considered as a supply under GST. But point number 2 and 3, there is certain exceptions to these conditions. That when I say exceptions to these conditions means there are certain items which are supplied even if without a consideration, still it will be a supply under GST. So there is an exception to point number 2. Likewise, there is an exception to point number 3. That is, it should be made in course or furtherance of the business. Even if it is not made in course or furtherance of the business, it will be a supply under GST. So for point number 2 and point number 3, there are certain exceptions. So let us see those exceptions. So first exception is, the second condition was supply should be made for a consideration. But exception to this particular condition is specified under Schedule 1, where is supply without consideration. So if any supply of goods or services is made without consideration, still it will be a supply under GST and it will be liable to tax under GST. So in short, supply without consideration, you can consider it as deemed supply. So let us see which are those particular transactions which even if it is done without consideration, GST will be applicable. So totally there are 4 such transactions which are exception to the second condition of supply under GST. So first transaction is permanent transfer or disposal of business assets. So students, if there is any kind of disposal means giving away of or any transfer of business asset. See, many business houses, they purchase business asset. So at the time of purchasing the asset, they pay input tax. And I told you all under GST, the business houses are getting the input tax credit, correct? So whenever a business house purchases a business asset and they have taken the input tax credit and later they are disposing of this business asset on which tax credit was taken, or if they are transferring this business asset permanently, then even if they are transferring it without consideration, still it will be considered as supply under GST and GST will be applicable on these products. So just let me give you all an example so I'll understand this particular transaction properly. Suppose I am having a big company where I have purchased lots of laptops for use for my staff. Now these laptops have become old. For after a certain number of years, the laptops what is used by my staff are become old. So what do? I donate these laptops to some charitable institution. So when I had purchased these laptops, it was my asset of my business. I had taken the input tax credit on this asset. Now later when I am disposing of these laptops to some charitable institution, I will obviously give to the charitable institution without any payment, without any consideration. But still under GST, it will be liable to tax because it is one of the exceptions that is mentioned under Schedule 1, permanent transfer or disposal of business assets on which at the time of purchase, ITC, that is ITC means input tax credit, was availed. Is this clear, students? Supply without consideration, permanent transfer or disposal of business asset. Yes, okay. Second is supply between related person or distinct person. This all 4 points, whatever I'll be explaining you all, it is supply without consideration, where supply has taken place of goods or services, but no consideration is being involved. So supply between related person or distinct person. Now you all should know first of all what is the meaning of related persons. Related persons means member of the same family, okay, or maybe It can be where the persons are partners of the same firm, or employer-employee relationship, or persons who are directors or officers in the same businesses. And it can be where one particular person is controlling or having more than 25% voting rights in another company, so they become related persons. So if there is a supply between related persons, even without consideration, such supply will be liable to tax under GST. So in short, related person means a person who is under influence of another person is called related person. And now, what is distinct person? See, GST registration has to be taken state-wise. Suppose I have a business in Belgaum city. Likewise, I have a business in Kolhapur city. Now, Kolhapur comes under Maharashtra, Belgaum comes under Karnataka. So I have to take two registration, one under the state of Karnataka, one under the state of Maharashtra. So my business in Maharashtra and my business in Karnataka are two distinct persons. Distinct persons means person having the same PAN but two different GSTN numbers state-wise. So they become distinct persons. So if there is a supply between, suppose if I am supplying from my Belgaum branch to my Kolhapur branch certain items, even without consideration, it will be liable to tax under GST because it is supply between related person or distinct person, since it is covered under Schedule 1. Next, principal agent in course or furtherance of business. First of all, you all need to understand what is a principal and agent relationship. See, an agent is a person who, on behalf of the principal, will either sell the goods or purchase the goods, or either provide the services or procure the services. So, agent is basically a person who acts on behalf of the principal. So, if there is any supply of goods by a principal to his agent without consideration, then and if that supply is made in course or furtherance of the business, it will be liable to tax under GST even if such supply is without consideration. Next, importation of services in course or furtherance of business. Now, when any particular person is importing services in course or furtherance of the business, okay, from his related person or from his some establishment which is located maybe outside India, if it is without consideration, it will still be liable to tax under GST, and still it will be treated as a supply under GST. So remember students, importation of services, if any person is procuring from outside India, but it should be procured by a related person from outside India, without consideration, it will be considered as a supply under GST and it will be liable to tax under GST. So let me give you all one example. Suppose I have a legal I am into providing legal consultancy services, okay, and I have my headquarters in USA. So the headquarters in USA plus my branch in India, they both become what? Related person. So if I'm procuring any services from USA headquarters to Indian branch, if I'm procuring any services, even if it is without consideration, it is going to be liable to GST because it is covered under the exception covered under Schedule 1. So remember students, these are the only 4 exceptions that where even if there is no consideration, still it is considered as a supply under GST and GST will be applicable on these particular transactions. So we have seen 5 conditions, out of which the second condition, there is 4 exceptions. First is permanent transfer or disposal of business asset. The second one is that there should be a supply between related or distinct person, principal agent relationship, and importation of services. Then we seen that there is a third condition, that is the goods should be supplied, there should be a supply in course or furtherance of the business, means it should not be in personal capacity. Now there is an exception to this particular condition, that is condition number 3. So let us see what is the exception. import of services with consideration, whether or not in course or furtherance of business. So what does this mean? This means that you're importing the services which is with the consideration, but whether or not it is in course or furtherance of the business is irrespective, and still GST will be applicable even if it is in personal capacity, but it should be in respect of import of services, then only GST will be applicable. So import of services should be by a taxable person from his related person or establishment, which is even with consideration, but it is in his personal capacity, then also GST will be applicable. So is this clear, students? Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, any example for this, ma'am?
Okay, I'll give you an example. Suppose I am into some kind of business. Okay, maybe I'm into the business of selling some steel plates. Okay, I'm into that business, and I I am procuring a service from outside India. Okay, for an interior decoration of my home. For an interior decoration of my home, I'm procuring services from outside India with consideration. I'm making the payment, there is services involved, I'm importing the services, but it is in my personal capacity. So if you see under those 5 conditions, it is not considered as supply under GST. But that third condition has an exception which says that import of services with consideration, whether or not in course of furtherance of the business. So yes, it is fitting under this exception. So I am liable to GST for that particular supply. Is this clear? So when I'm importing any services, not goods, students, any services. So I'm importing the services of interior decoration to my particular house. I'm importing those services. Okay. I'm paying the money, but it is in my personal capacity. But still it will be liable to tax under GST. And still it will be treated as a supply under GST. So is this clear, students? Did you all understand what is the scope of supply under GST? First and foremost, you need to know that there are 5 conditions. If those 5 conditions are fulfilled, all the 5 conditions are fulfilled, then only it amounts to supply. Now, in that 5 conditions, there is condition number 2 and 3, which has certain exceptions. And after meeting those exceptions, if those transactions are meeting those exceptions, it will be considered as supply under GST. And if 5 conditions are not fulfilled, then there will be no, it is not considered as supply under GST, and no GST will be applicable on those particular supply. Is this clear, students? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So scope of supply, if we just sum up everything, scope of supply is defined under section 7 of CGST Act, Central Goods and Service Tax Act. So scope of supply is defined under section 7. So section 7 subsection 1 clause A. Section 7 subsection 1 clause A says that all types of supply, including sale, transfer. So supply does not only mean sales, students. It can mean transfer, it can mean barter, lease, rental made for a consideration in course or furtherance of business. Section 7 subsection 1 clause B says that supply also includes importation of services with consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of the business, which we have seen. And also supply includes under section 7 subsection 1 clause C, supply made without consideration activities specified in schedule 1. We have seen 4 activities that are specified under schedule 1, that even if there is no consideration, even if we are giving it free of cost, still supply, it is considered as supply, and still it is liable to be taxed under GST. So what is the complete scope of supply? We can see supply means any kind of supply which is made for a consideration in course of furtherance of business. It includes importation of services with consideration, but whether or not in course of business is irrespective, and it also includes supply made without consideration only for those activities which is specified in schedule 1. So students, did you all understand what is the scope of supply? Yes, students?
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, if there is no consideration, then on what basis they have to pay the tax? Means GST.
See students, that comes under value of supply, which you'll have in your module number 3, but still I'll explain you. Suppose if you're disposing of a business asset, so we take the first exception to without consideration, permanent disposal of business asset. So I had given you all an example that we purchased the laptops, have taken the input tax credit on laptops. The laptops have become old, so we are giving it off to whom? The charitable institution, correct? So at the time of giving to the charitable institution, what is the WDV, written down value of that laptops in the book, and what is the market value of that laptops as on today? Those old, what is the scrap value of the laptop as on today? So on that particular WDV value, you are going to charge GST. So
Okay,
that,
ma'am.
okay, so that is called value of supply. Means at what, now we are just seeing the scope of supply. In terms of value of supply, we have a separate concept about it, which which we will be discussing it later on. But as of now, as to just clear your doubt, it will be on the WDV value of the laptop. Clear? Your doubt is cleared?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Shall we move ahead? So even in respect of, suppose I'll just clear one more. I'll just clear one more part of your doubt. Like if it is sale between related persons, okay, if it is without consideration. So if the same goods, if I'm providing to a related person and the same goods I'm providing to an unrelated person, so what is the value that of the goods that I'll be selling it to an unrelated person? Okay, the same value, on the same value I'll be charging it to charging GST if I'm selling it to a related person. So suppose if I'm into the business of selling cell phones, and I usually sell the cell phones to the customer at 15,000, depending on the brand I sell it at 15,000. But suppose if I'm selling it to a related person, he's my known person, member of same family, I'm selling it free of cost, no consideration. So what does GST says that under schedule 1 you have to charge GST. Now on what value will I charge GST? To an unrelated person I'm selling it for 15,000. To my known person I have sell it for zero value. So I should charge GST on 15,000 because that is the value of that particular cell phone. Though I'm selling it free of cost, I have to pay GST on that 15,000. So is this clear, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So let us move ahead. So again, section number 7, scope of supply. Now let us see this scope of supply, what all it includes, what all it excludes. So scope of supply, it includes supply with consideration in course of furtherance of the business, which we have already seen. Import of services with consideration, whether or not in course of furtherance of the business, this also we have seen. Supply without consideration, schedule 1, which we have seen, that is there are 4 transactions in this: permanent transfer or disposal of business asset, then supply to and related or distinct person, principal agent relationship, and importation of services. So this we have already seen. Next, activities treated as supply of goods or supply of services, schedule 2, and excludes negative list, schedule 3. So let me explain this schedule 2 and schedule 3 to you all. Students, schedule 2, they are stating that there are certain transactions that are given by the government, because many a times there is lots of confusion on certain transaction, whether it is a goods or whether it is services. There's a lot of transaction confusion. Like when you go to an hotel, and when you order your food, so whether that food it becomes supply of service or whether it becomes supply of goods. So there's lots of confusion on certain transaction, whether it is a supply of goods or supply of services. So schedule 2 has, they have given a certain list of activities which help us to know whether it is supply of goods or supply of services. This we will be seeing in the succeeding slide. Now schedule number 3, negative list, excludes scope of supply, excludes negative list. Now when I say excludes negative list means government has told or specified that, the act has specified that though they are services or though they are goods, we are putting it in negative list. When it means negative list means no GST will be applicable on such services. So there are certain list of services given in the act which says that though there is a service, though there will be a consideration, still it is under the negative list, which means that no GST will be applicable on such services which are being supplied. So now in my succeeding slide, we will be seeing schedule number 2, what are the activities, and schedule number 3, what all is covered in the negative list. So simply negative list means a list of transactions on which no GST is applicable. So let us move ahead. Let us see schedule number 2, that is activities treated as supply of goods or supply of services. So first, transfer of goods with transfer of title. So suppose you, and I transfer includes supply. Like in my earlier slide, I told you all that supply means sale, transfer, barter, exchange. So when you're transferring goods with the transfer of title in it, so it becomes supply of goods. For example, suppose if there is, if you go to an Emercon showroom, okay, and they sell you the, if they sell you the clothing there, like you go and purchase some clothes for you, some garments for you, so there they are transferring the goods as well as the title. That garment when you purchase, it becomes yours, correct? There is a transfer in the title as well, so it becomes a supply of goods. Second is hire purchase. So what happens in hire purchase, students? Hire purchase means what happens that there is a transfer of goods, but the payment is made in installment. So still it is considered as supply of goods because eventually the title has been transferred to the recipient at the payment of the last installment. In hire purchase, at the payment of the last installment, what happens is the particular goods is been transferred in the name of the purchaser or in the name of the recipient. Therefore, it becomes the supply of goods. There is a confusion regarding this, like the hire purchase, because it is a service also type given, because till you don't pay the last installment, the title is not transferred. So whether it is supply of goods or supply of services, so students, hire purchase, it is a supply of goods. Next, transfer of goods without transfer of title. So suppose you are transferring goods without transferring the title, that is goods given on, not even on rent, given on rent. So for example, if suppose XYZ Limited is giving his machinery to use for ABC Limited. So suppose if the machinery is provided by XYZ Limited to be given on rent to ABC Limited, so here only the goods are being transferred, but the title still remains with XYZ Limited who is transferring. So it is a supply of services when you're giving any goods on rent. It is not supply of goods since the title is not yet transferred. Next, services in respect of land or buildings that is given on lease or rental, etc. So it is considered as supply of services. So when any lease agreement for land is being given, so that particular land is being used by the purchaser, or is used, sorry, not by the purchaser, by the tenant, it is being used by the tenant. So that is the service that he is receiving and it is not goods. That is why it is a supply of service. Next, treatment of process. Treatment of process is a supply of service. Now what is meaning of treatment of process? Suppose I'm into again a business of garments, and whatever clothes, whatever garment I'm selling, I usually dye the products. Usually clothes are being dyed, the color is being printed on those particular clothing. So For that process, I give that job work to some other company. So suppose I am an textile company, and only for dyeing purpose, only for the cloth dyeing purpose, I am allocating the job to someone else, just to process that particular cloth into a colored cloth, and then again I take back the um take back the cloth from that particular uh, person to whom I have sublet the work. Okay, so this is a treatment of process that I'm giving. So suppose, let me just put it in the form of an example. Suppose I'm selling a particular garment. Okay, and if the customer has asked me to just dye that particular product, so I only supply garments, I do not dye it. So for coloring that particular garment, I I give that cloth for coloring to some other person on job work basis. So because I'm doing some treatment of process in that, it becomes a supply of service and not supply of goods. Next, transfer of business asset. Now again, when you're transferring the business asset, it becomes supply of goods, because asset is a goods, and where the, even if the title is transferred along with the asset, it becomes supply of goods. Renting of immovable property, it becomes supply of service, because again students, in renting, the ownership is not transferred, only you're providing a service. Next, construction of complex building or civil structure. So construction of any complex building, civil structure, even if there is a consideration involved, okay, it is going to be a supply of service and not supply of goods. Next, temporary transfer or permitting use or enjoyment of any intellectual property right, it becomes a supply of service. Development, design, programming, customization, adaptation, upgradation, enhancement, implementation of IT software, it becomes supply of service. Agreeing to obligation to refrain from any act or tolerate any act, it becomes supply of service. Transfer of right to use any goods for any purpose, it becomes supply of service. So this, your example, I can give you transfer of right to use any goods for any purpose, like machinery given on hire, it becomes a supply of service. So students, have you understood all this particular transactions and why it is a supply of goods or supply of service? Do you all have any doubt in any particular type of activities? If yes, I will explain it in detail, otherwise it is self-explanatory. Did everyone understand all these particular activities? Yes? Yes, students? See, now your temporary transfer or permitting use of intellectual property, like suppose if there is a permanent transfer of any patent, it is a supply of service. Agreeing to obligation to refrain from an act. So for an example, suppose like we know there is cable operators who are providing cable services in respective specified areas, right? So suppose if one particular cable operator is requesting another, or is entering into an agreement with another cable operator that you please do not provide cable services in this particular area, since I am providing the cable services in that particular area. So the cable operator B will not provide, will refrain himself to provide the services in that particular area. So for that, some consideration is given. So that is supply of services. So is this all activities understood, whether how it is supply of goods or how it is a supply of services? So is this clear, students? Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Next, let us see negative list. Negative list, again, schedule 3. Negative list means activities neither the supply of goods nor the supply of services and GST will not be applicable on all these transactions. So let us see. Services by an employee to the employer in course or relation to his employment. See, services has been provided. You know GST is on services, goods and services. So if any service is provided by an employee to the employer, okay, in the course of the employment, it will not be liable to be taxed under GST. So for example, I am providing services to Jain College as an employee. Jain College is my employer. Whatever salary it is giving to me, it is not liable to be taxed under GST because it is covered under the negative list under Schedule 3 of CGST Act. Next, services by a court or tribunal. So if any services has been provided by court or tribunal which is established under any law, let it be under any law for the time being in force, let it be a district court, let it be a supreme court, let it be a high court, if any services has been provided, it will not be liable to be taxed under GST. Though there is a service, though there is a supply, though there is payment involved, still it will not be liable to be taxed under GST because it is covered under the negative list. Next, functions, duties performed by MP, MLAs, panchayats, municipalities, local authority. So if any functions or duties are being performed by all these respective authorities, or duties which are even performed maybe by any person who's holding a post in the constitution, in the provision of constitutions in that capacity, like any duties performed by President of India, or maybe the Prime Minister of India, or maybe the Speaker of Lok Sabha. So all these duties that are being performed by them, they are providing services, right? But still it will not be liable to tax under GST because it is covered under the negative list. Next, services of funeral, burial, crematorium, or mortuary, including transportation of the deceased. So if any services in respect, when any funeral takes place, or whatever services are being received in respect of any funeral, or at the time of burying, or at the time of burning that particular deceased body, or mortuary services in hospital, so all those are services for which there is a payment, but since it is covered in the negative list, GST will not be applicable. Sale of land subject to Schedule 2. So Schedule 2, we have seen that there is a sale of immovable property. It is a supply of services. So when there is a sale of land which is subject to Schedule 2, there is no GST applicable. Sale of land, just remember, if there is a sale of land, okay, with consideration, okay, subject to Schedule 2, there is no GST applicable on such sale of land. Next, that is sale of building. Next, actionable claim other than lottery, betting and gambling. So in my lecture number 2, we had already seen that goods also includes actionable claim. So what is this? What does exactly this negative list means? So it means that all the actionable claims, okay, are covered under the negative list, exception lottery, betting, gambling. So if the actionable claim is lottery, betting, gambling, it will be liable to GST. But apart from lottery, betting, gambling, all other actionable claims are covered under the negative list and they are not liable under GST. And we have already seen what is actionable claim. That is claim that is not secured under against any debt or mortgage. Activities or transactions notified by the government. So government may undertake any activities or may announce any activities or transactions either by the central or state government, that such activities should be covered under the negative list or should not be treated as supply of goods or supply of services, and no GST will be applicable. So government keeps on notifying certain activities or transactions. So if government notifies apart from this above mentioned transaction, if government still notifies any other transaction or activities, then those transaction or activities will be covered under negative list, and negative list means it is not considered as a supply of goods, neither it is considered as supply of services, and if it is not goods and not services, then GST will not be applicable. So is the negative list clear, students? Yes, students, is all the negative
Yes,
list clear?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Next. Next, we are supposed to see now composite supply and mixed supply. Okay. So, scope of supply is defined under section 7. Composite supply is defined under section 8, subsection A. So let me just explain you what is composite supply, and then we'll go through the slide. So first, let me give you an example. Students, when you'll go to buy a cell phone in the showroom, cell phone showroom, do you all just buy in the box whatever they give you? Do they give you just the cell phone, or along with the cell phone they give you a charger, they give you a battery, they give you earphones? So what all they are providing? So apart from the cell phone, they are also providing you certain other elements which are naturally bundled with each other. Now that cell phone, with that they are providing you a charger, so charger is required to charge the cell phone. They are providing you earphones because earphones is you require if you want to hear anything on your cell phone. So whenever you go to buy a cell phone, they give you, apart from cell phone, they give you 2-3 other supplies which are naturally bundled with each other. Correct? Now, what is the rate of GST they will charge you on this composite supply? So composite supply is nothing but, students, it is 2 or more taxable supplies, okay, which are naturally bundled with each other. But one among those supplies is a principal supply. Now, when you go to buy cell phone, they give you cell phone, they give you charger, they give you earphones, right? Now, for what had you gone to the shop to buy? Had you gone to buy the charger or the earphones? You had gone to buy the cell phone. So cell phone becomes the principal supply. So what is principal supply? Principal supply is the supply of goods and services which is predominant element in the composite supply. So in the box of the cell phone, what is the predominant supply? It is the cell phone, not the charger or earphones. Charger and earphones are additionally given to you in over and above that particular cell phone. So composite supply is nothing but supply of 2 or more products, goods or services which are naturally bundled, and one among that supply will be a principal supply. Principal supply is a predominant supply. Now, what is the rate of GST you will charge in that particular supply? Can anyone tell me what is the rate of GST you will charge? Whether they will charge the rate applicable to the charger, whether they will charge the rate applicable to the earphones, or whether they will charge the rate applicable to the mobile. Common sense. What is the rate they will? Yes. Yes, students. What is the rate of tax they will apply on that composite supply? Whether they will charge the GST rate applicable to the cell phone, applicable to the charger, or applicable to the earphones. Which is the tax rate they are going to charge you?
Cell phone.
Cell phone. Why? Because cell phone is the principal supply there. So let us just go through the slide now. Composite supply is nothing but supply of 2 or more taxable supplies. Now 2 or more means, when I say cell phone, apart from cell phone, you are getting charger, you are getting the earphones. So it becomes 2 or more taxable supply. Charger also is liable to tax and earphones also are liable to tax. Of goods and services, or both, are naturally bundled. Now, are they artificially bundled, students? You all tell me. Because charger and earphones are related to cell phone, so they are naturally bundled with each other. Now, one of which is a principal supply, that is predominant supply. Next, what is the tax liability? What is the GST liability? Tax on such principal supply will be the tax charged on the total composite supply. On the total box of cell phone, the GST rate applicable to the cell phone will be applicable. So tax on the principal supply, whatever is the tax applicable on the principal supply, that will be the tax charged on the entire composite supply. So for example, you can say travel, printing of books, printing on envelopes, servicing of car, all these are examples of composite supply. So how travel, I'll just give you one more example apart from that cell phone example. Suppose if you are taking a travel ticket from Mumbai to Delhi, okay, and in that travel ticket, the services of food, like when you're traveling from Mumbai to Delhi, you're taking a ticket, and that ticket includes the services of food being served on the board if you're going by flight. Okay, and free insurance also is covered in that ticket, and airport launch also is being covered in that ticket. Now, in this case, what becomes the principal supply? The transport of passengers. Okay, students, have your understanding. If I am taking a ticket from Mumbai to Delhi, okay, and that ticket includes not only the travel cost, but it also includes the food that will be provided in the during the travel. It also includes the free insurance during the travel. So what will it is a composite supply, because it is two or more taxable supplies which are naturally bundled. Correct. Now, what will be the GST rate applicable, students? The GST rate will be applicable is the rate that is applicable on the travel, on the transportation of passengers. What is the GST rate applicable? That rate will be applicable on the entire composite supply. Is this clear, students? And students, remember, naturally bundled means they should be bundled naturally in the ordinary course of business. It should not be an artificial bundle, which I will explain you all in the mixed supply. So I hope you all have understood what is the meaning of naturally bundled. Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Now let us go to mixed supply. Now what is mixed supply? On the, sorry. So what is mixed supply? So mixed supply is again where there is two or more individual supplies, okay, which are not naturally bundled. Now suppose students, during, I'll just give an example, during the time of Diwali or during the time of any festival, when you'll go to Big Bazaar or when you'll go to DMart, there are some combo packs kept where you'll have sweets. Along with sweets, you'll have some goodies along sweets, and you have chocolates and you have chips. You have a combo pack that is being made. So is that naturally bundled, or it is not naturally bundled? It is not naturally bundled, right? So this is a combo pack that has been given to you all, which has chocolates, which has dry fruits, which has chips in it, right? So it is a mixed supply. So mixed supply means where two or more individual supplies are being provided which are not naturally bundled. Now, what is the GST rate that they will apply on this entire combo product? So under mixed supply, the GST rate that will be applicable is the highest rate of tax. What they will determine is in respect of dry fruits, chips, and chocolates, which particular product has the highest GST rate. Suppose chocolate has the highest GST rate, so on the entire combo product, that highest GST rate will be applicable. So this is nothing but mixed supply. So let us see. Two or more individual supplies of goods and services or combination made in conjunction with each other, which are not naturally bundled, and it is given for a single price. Like the chocolate, biscuit, and dry fruits is given at a single price, as one single product. And what is the tax liability? Treated as supply of that particular supply which attracts highest rate of tax. So suppose if there is chocolates which are at which is at the rate of suppose 12%, chips is at the rate of 5%, and dry fruits is at the rate of 18%. So students, tell me what is the rate of GST that will be applicable on this mixed supply? Whether 12% will be applicable, 5%, or 18%. What is the rate applicable?
18%.
18%, ma'am.
Very good. So remember, for composite supply, the rate applicable will be the rate of the principal supply. And for mixed supply, the rate applicable will be the highest rate of tax in that particular combo pack or combo supply. So is this clear, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today we had seen what is the scope of supply, which is covered under section 7. We saw what is mixed supply, what is composite supply, that is covered under section 8.